Before this story begins, do me a small favor, subscribe to this channel, not because it helps me, but because stories like this, they change how you see people. And once you hear this all the way through, you'll understand why I needed to tell it exactly the way I lived it. Because confidence isn't what people think it is. And attraction isn't built the way movies lie to you about. People used to look at me and assume I was born confident. They thought it was natural, effortless. Like I stepped into a room and somehow just knew how to hold attention. Like conversations bent toward me without resistance. Like I never doubted myself, never replayed moments in my head. Never wondered why someone's smile faded halfway through a date. They were wrong. Very wrong. What they didn't see were the quiet moments, me sitting alone after dates that ended too early, staring at my phone, rereading messages that suddenly stopped coming. They didn't hear the silence after laughter that felt forced, or notice how often I blamed myself for things I couldn't name. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my 20s, I felt invisible. Not unseen worse than that. Overlooked. I wasn't unattractive. I wasn't dull. I had friends. I had opinions. I had a life that looked fine from the outside. But whenever I felt a real spark towards someone, whenever I wanted a man to feel something back, something always collapsed quietly between us. Conversations stayed polite. Dates wrapped up early with soft excuses. Texts slowed, then stopped. No fight, no closure. Just distance. I watched other women do it effortlessly. They laughed and men leaned in. They spoke and men remembered. Meanwhile, I replayed every sentence I'd said, every smile I'd offered, every pause I hadn't filled fast enough. At first, I blamed my looks. Then my voice. Then the way I dressed. I changed my clothes. I changed my hair. I even practiced how I laughed softer, lighter, less too much. Nothing changed. What I didn't understand back then, what no one teaches you, is that attraction doesn't come from impressing someone. It comes from how you make them feel when they're with you. But I didn't learn that from a book. I learned it from a man who barely spoke. His name was Daniel Brooks. I met him at a friend's birthday dinner. He wasn't the loudest person at the table. He didn't dominate conversations or tell impressive stories. In fact, if you weren't paying attention, you might have overlooked him completely. And yet, people gravitated toward him. Men respected him instantly. Women leaned in when he spoke. Even strangers trusted him in minutes. I watched it happen in real time, and it unsettled me. By the end of the night, I realized something strange. Daniel hadn't talked much about himself at all. He hadn't tried to be funny or impressive. He asked questions. Not the kind people ask out of politeness, but the kind that made you stop for a second before answering. The kind that made people search themselves for honesty. And when someone spoke, he listened, not waiting for his turn, not interrupting, not drifting. When he looked at you, it felt like the rest of the room went quiet. A week later, I ran into him again at a cafe. I don't know what came over me, but I asked him outright what his secret was. He laughed softly and said something that rewired my understanding of human connection forever. Most people are so focused on being interesting, he said, that they forget to be interested. That sentence stayed with me. Daniel explained something no one had ever put into words for me before. Real connection doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence. People don't remember your words. They remember how safe they felt around you. How seen, how understood. When someone feels emotionally recognized, their body responds before their mind does. Shoulders drop. Breathing slows. Smiles become real. It isn't manipulation. It's human nature. I became obsessed with understanding this not in a dark or creepy way, but in a desperate, self-improving one. I started reading about psychology, emotional intelligence, communication patterns, presence. But more importantly, I practiced. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say next. I stopped trying to impress. I started listening to feel, not to reply. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things changed. Men didn't react dramatically. They reacted differently. Conversations lasted longer. Eye contact lingered. Laughter felt natural instead of strained. Some men told me things they claimed they'd never said out loud before. Others said something that surprised me every time. I feel calm around you. They couldn't explain it. I could. I learned to mirror emotions, not words. When someone spoke excitedly, I met their energy. When they slowed down, I slowed with them. When they shared something vulnerable, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe. That silence, that uncomfortable space most people rush to escape, was where trust grew. And then came Michael Reynolds. Someone I would have been nervous around before. Someone who used to intimidate me simply by existing. This time was different. I didn't perform. I didn't overthink. I stayed present. I asked about his childhood, his fears, the things he wanted but hadn't admitted to himself yet. And when he hesitated, I waited. At the end of the night, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "I don't know what it is," he said, "but I feel like I can breathe around you." That was the moment everything clicked. The power was never control. It was connection. And I realized something even deeper, something that scared me a little. When you understand how deeply your presence can affect someone, you carry responsibility. Because emotional influence, when misused, can wound. And from that moment on, I chose something different. Not manipulation, not games, but real connection. And that choice changed everything. Something changes inside you when you realize your presence has weight. Not attention, not attraction. Weight? After that night with Michael, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd unlocked some cheat code to human connection. If anything, I felt quiet, thoughtful, almost humbled. Because once you understand that people open up around you not because of what you say, but because of how safe they feel, you can't unlearn it. And you can't pretend it doesn't matter. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way someone's shoulders softened mid-conversation, how their voice dropped when they stopped performing, how quickly people revealed truths they hadn't planned to share, truths they sometimes looked surprised to hear coming out of their own mouths. And with that awareness came restraint. I became careful. Not every connection needed to go deeper. Not every emotional opening needed to be explored. Not every spark needed to be followed. That was the real test. Because emotional presence can pull people toward you whether you intend it or not. And I learned the hard way that not everyone who feels seen is prepared for what comes next. There was one man, Ethan, who taught me that lesson. We met through mutual friends. The connection was immediate, effortless, too effortless. He opened up quickly, too quickly. His past, his regrets, his loneliness, all laid bare within weeks. And I realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't falling for me. He was falling for the feeling of being understood. That was the first time I stepped back. I softened the intensity. I set boundaries. I let the connection breathe instead of deepening it. And when it faded naturally, I felt relief, not loss. That's when I knew I'd changed. Before, I chased attention. Now, I respected emotional space. Some connections turned into friendships, real ones. Some drifted away without drama. Some surprised me by staying steady without intensity. And a few became something meaningful only because they were allowed to grow slowly. The irony was impossible to ignore. The less I tried to be desired, the more unforgettable I became. The less I chased connection, the deeper it formed. The more present I was, the less I needed validation. People started asking me what had changed. "You seem confident," they'd say. "You seem grounded. You seem different." I always smiled at that. Because confidence didn't come from learning how to attract someone. It came from learning how to honor them. To listen without agenda. To respond without control. To be present without taking. And here's the truth no one tells you. Real confidence isn't loud. Real attraction isn't forceful. Real connection isn't rushed. It's quiet. It's patient. It's respectful. And when you offer someone that kind of presence, even briefly, it leaves a mark. Not because you tried, but because you were real. That's the secret people don't talk about. And that's the story I needed to tell. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or like you were trying too hard to be chosen, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are coming. Stories about human connection, self-respect, emotional intelligence, and the quiet power of presence. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply be there.